Okay, so if you're listening to this, you probably already know what tinnitus is.
Yeah.
But for anyone who doesn't, it's basically this constant ringing or buzzing or whooshing in your ears.
Right. And it can be like super frustrating.
Yeah, it can make it hard to sleep or
Yeah.
concentrate or even just relax.
For sure. And the thing is, a lot of the treatments out there, well, they don't really get to the root of the problem.
Yeah, they're more like Band-Aids than actual solutions.
Exactly. Like sound therapy or hearing aids, those can help some people, but they don't actually fix the underlying issue.
Right. It's kind of like trying to put out a fire with, like, a squirt gun. It might make things a little better for a minute, but the fire's still there.
Exactly.
So in this deep dive, we're going to be looking at this new method called the 5-second mute button method.
Have you heard of this?
Yeah, I've seen some stuff about it online.
Yeah. It's gotten a lot of attention lately.
Yeah, and it's making some pretty bold claims,
Like what?
like that it can silence tinnitus in just 5 seconds.
5 seconds. Come on. That's got to be too good to be true, right?
Right, that's what I thought too. But I figured it's worth taking a closer look, see what the science says.
Yeah, definitely. Especially if it could actually help people.
So how does it work?
Well, the basic idea is that tinnitus is actually caused by an imbalance in brain chemistry.
Mm.
And that by rebalancing those chemicals, you can essentially mute the tinnitus.
So we're not talking about masking the sound or anything like.
Nope. This is about actually targeting the root cause in the brain.
Interesting. What kind of chemicals are we talking about here?
The main ones are GABA and glutamate. These are neurotransmitters that play a big role in how our brains process sound.
Oh, okay, I've heard of those.
Yeah. And when they're out of balance, it can create all sorts of problems, including tinnitus.
So this mute button method is claiming to rebalance those chemicals.
That's right.
But how? Like,
Yeah.
what do you actually have to do?
Well, that's what we're going to be exploring in this deep dive. We're going to be looking at the science behind the method, the different techniques involved, and the potential benefits and risks.
And hopefully by the end of this, we'll have a better understanding of whether this 5-second mute button method is the real deal or just another gimmick.
For sure. I'm curious to see what we find out.
Me too. So let's dive in.
Okay.
So the first thing I'm wondering is, like, how is tinnitus even connected to things like sleep and anxiety and brain function?
Yeah, that's a good question. Because when you're dealing with that constant noise, it's hard to imagine anything beyond just getting some peace and quiet.
Right. But it seems like tinnitus might actually be a symptom of a much bigger problem.
Yeah, kind of like a neural traffic jam in the brain.
A traffic jam.
Yeah, think about it. Your brain is constantly processing tons of information even when you're asleep. But with tinnitus, it's like there's this extra layer of noise that's constantly disrupting the flow.
So it's not just the sound itself. It's about how that constant neural activity is messing with the balance in our brains, right?
Mhm.
Affecting things like sleep
Yeah.
and even our ability to focus.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's break this down a little bit. How does tinnitus affect sleep, for example?
Well, one of the key neurotransmitters we've been talking about, GABA, it plays a crucial role in regulating sleep cycles.
It's the brain's natural off switch.
Right.
But if that off switch is broken, so to speak, because of this tinnitus, it makes sense that people would have trouble sleeping.
Exactly. And it's not just falling asleep. Tinnitus can disrupt different stages of sleep, leaving you feeling groggy and unrefreshed, even if you've slept for 8 hours.
Right, like you never really get that deep, restful sleep that you need.
Right. And that can lead to all sorts of other problems, like fatigue and irritability and difficulty concentrating.
Yeah, it's a vicious cycle.
It is. And it's not just sleep either. Tinnitus can also contribute to anxiety.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Remember, when those GABA levels are low, our brains are more prone to stress and anxiety.
And let's be real, who wouldn't be anxious with this constant ringing in their ears?
Totally. It's like your brain is stuck in fight or flight mode all the time.
Always on high alert.
Exactly. And that can take a toll on your mental and physical health over time.
Yeah, for sure. So if I'm understanding this correctly, this mute button method is basically trying to calm down that overactive nervous system
Exactly.
by rebalancing those neurotransmitters.
Yep. And that could have a ripple effect on all sorts of things, including sleep and anxiety.
Wow, that's pretty amazing. But I got to ask, is there actually any evidence to back this up? Like, has this method been scientifically proven?
That's the million-dollar question. And honestly, the research is still kind of in its early stages. But there have been some promising studies. Well, for example, there was one study from Harvard University that found a specific type of brainwave entrainment, which basically uses sound to synchronize brain activity, led to a significant reduction in tinnitus loudness and distress.
That's interesting.
Yeah. And another study, this one was published in the Journal of the American Tinnitus Association, showed that a combination of dietary changes and mindfulness practices helped to improve both tinnitus severity and sleep quality.
So, while we don't have all the answers yet, there's definitely some evidence to suggest that targeting brain chemistry can make a difference.
For sure.
But before we get too excited about this, I think we need to take a closer look at how this method actually works and what it involves.
Definitely. Because so far we've mostly been talking about the theory behind it, but
Yeah.
for people who are struggling with tinnitus right now, the real question is, what does this method look like in practice?
Exactly. Like, is it really as simple as pressing a button, or is there more to it?
Yeah. That's what we're going to explore in the next part of our deep dive. We're going to unpack the practical aspects of this method, compare it to other treatments, and look at what you need to know before you consider trying this approach.
Okay, sounds good. I'm ready to dive deeper.
Me too. All right, so welcome back to our deep dive on this 5-second mute button method.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting stuff, huh?
It is.
We were talking before the break about how this method claims to work by rebalancing these neurotransmitters in the brain.
Right, GABA and glutamate.
Yeah, and how that could potentially have all these other benefits like improving sleep and reducing anxiety.
Right.
But before we get too carried away with all that, I think it's important to pick a step back and look at what this method actually involves.
Yeah, for sure. Because so far we've mostly just been talking about the theory.
Right. But for people who are actually struggling with tinnitus, they want to know what they can do to try to get some relief.
Exactly. So let's talk about the practical side of things.
Okay, so first things first. Is it really as simple as pressing a button?
Unfortunately, no.
No?
I mean, I wish it were that easy, but it's a little more complicated than that.
So what do you have to do?
Well, the good news is that there's no, surgery or anything crazy like that.
Okay, that's good to hear.
Yeah. But it does involve making some lifestyle changes.
Like what?
Well, a lot of it comes down to diet.
Diet.
Yeah.
So what you eat can actually affect your tinnitus.
It can, yeah.
Interesting.
There are certain foods that can either help or hurt your tinnitus.
Okay, so which foods are good?
Well, foods that are high in GABA are generally good.
Like what?
Like fermented foods, for example. Things like yogurt, sauerkraut, kimchi.
Yep.
Those can help to boost your GABA levels.
Like kimchi.
Yeah, and leafy greens are good too.
Spinach, kale, that kind of thing.
Exactly. And even dark chocolate.
Really?
Yeah, dark chocolate's actually good for you,
Oh.
in moderation, of course.
I can get behind that.
But it's not just about eating the right foods, it's also about avoiding the wrong ones.
Like what?
Well, processed foods are a big no-no.
Junk food, basically.
Yeah, pretty much. And sugary drinks, too.
Okay, so that's diet. What else?
Well, stress management is huge.
Stress management.
Yeah, stress can actually make tinnitus worse.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah, when you're stressed out, your body releases all these hormones like cortisol that can trigger inflammation and exacerbate tinnitus.
Right, so finding ways to relax and de-stress is important.
Exactly. Things like meditation, yoga, deep breathing exercises.
Those can all help.
Yeah. And getting enough sleep is crucial too.
Sleep. I feel like we've been talking a lot about sleep today.
Well, it's super important for overall health, but it's especially important for people with tinnitus.
Why is that?
Well, when you're sleep deprived, your body produces more of the stress hormone cortisol.
Right, which we just talked about.
Exactly, and that can make your tinnitus worse. So getting a good night's sleep is one of the best things you can do for your tinnitus.
Okay, so we've got diet, stress management, and sleep. Anything else?
Well, there are also some specific techniques that are designed to help rebalance those neurotransmitters.
Oh, okay, like what?
Well, one technique that's gotten a lot of attention lately is called neuromodulation.
Neuromodulation.
Yeah, it sounds kind of complicated, but it's actually pretty simple. It basically involves using sound or electrical stimulation to target specific areas of the brain.
And that can help with tinnitus?
It can, yeah. There's some evidence to suggest that neuromodulation can help to rebalance those neurotransmitters and reduce tinnitus symptoms.
Interesting. So how does that work?
Well, there are different types of neuromodulation, but one of the most common is called transcranial magnetic stimulation, or TMS.
TMS.
Yeah. It basically involves using a device that delivers magnetic pulses to specific areas of the brain.
Okay, so it's like zapping your brain with magnets.
Kind of, yeah. But it's not painful or anything. It's actually a pretty non-invasive procedure.
So this TMS thing, it can actually help to rebalance those neurotransmitters.
It can, yeah. There have been some studies that have shown promising results.
Wow, that's pretty amazing. But what about side effects? Are there any risks involved with this kind of treatment?
Well, like any medical treatment, there are always potential risks and side effects. But with TMS, the side effects are usually pretty mild.
Like what?
Some people might experience headaches or scalp discomfort after the treatment.
Okay, but that's about it.
Yeah, for the most part, it's generally considered to be a safe and effective treatment option.
So would you say that this mute button method is like a cure for tinnitus?
Well, I wouldn't go that far. There's no cure for tinnitus, at least not yet. But this method does offer a new and potentially more effective approach to managing the condition.
So it's about managing the symptoms, not necessarily eliminating them completely.
Exactly. It's about finding ways to reduce the loudness and the distress associated with tinnitus so that you can live a more normal life.
That makes sense. So where can people go to learn more about this method and maybe even try it out for themselves?
Well, there are a lot of resources available online. There are websites, articles, videos.
You can even find practitioners who specialize in this method.
Yeah, for sure. And if you're interested in learning more, I would definitely recommend doing some research and talking to a healthcare professional.
Yeah, good advice.
No,
It's always important to do your due diligence and make sure that any treatment you're considering is right for you.
Absolutely.
All right, so we've covered a lot of ground today. We've talked about the science behind tinnitus, the different ways it can affect your life, and the potential benefits of this 5-second mute button method.
Yeah, we've been through a lot.
But I think the big takeaway here is that there is hope for people with tinnitus.
Yeah, absolutely. There are things you can do to manage the condition and improve your quality of life.
And this mute button method seems like it could be a really promising approach.
It definitely has potential.
But as always, it's important to be informed, do your research, and talk to your doctor.
Exactly. Don't just take our word for it.
Right. So, what's next? What are we diving into in the final part of this deep dive?
Well, we're going to be taking a look at some of the criticisms of this mute button method.
Yeah, because I'm sure there are some.
Yeah, there are always skeptics.
And we're going to be talking about the importance of managing expectations and finding what works best for you.
Exactly. Because there's no one-size-fits-all solution for tinnitus.
So stay tuned for that.
We'll be right back.
All right, so we're back and ready to wrap up this deep dive into the 5-second mute button method.
Yeah.
We've talked about the science behind it and the potential benefits and all that, but now I think it's time to address the elephant in the room,
What's that?
the criticisms.
Ah, yes. There are always going to be some people who are skeptical of anything new.
Right. Especially when it comes to something like tinnitus, which has been so notoriously difficult to treat.
Exactly. So, what are some of the main criticisms that you've come across?
Well, one of the biggest ones is that this method is just too good to be true.
Yeah, I can see why people would say that 5 seconds. Come on.
Right. It sounds almost like a miracle cure.
And as we all know, there's no such thing as a miracle cure for tinnitus.
Exactly. So I think it's important to manage expectations. This method might be helpful for some people, but it's not a magic bullet.
Right. And it's not a quick fix either. It takes time and effort to make these lifestyle changes and to really retrain your brain.
Right. It's not like you can just snap your fingers and make the tinnitus go away.
Nope. It's a process.
And another criticism is that this method is basically just repackaging a bunch of stuff that we already know is good for us,
Like what?
like eating a healthy diet and managing stress and getting enough sleep.
Yeah, those are all things that are good for your overall health, but some people argue that they're not specific enough to really target tinnitus.
Right. They say that there's no evidence to suggest that these lifestyle changes can actually rebalance those neurotransmitters in the brain.
And to be fair, the research on this method is still pretty limited.
Yeah, we need more studies to really confirm its effectiveness.
But even if it doesn't completely eliminate tinnitus, it could still be helpful in managing the symptoms.
Right. Like even if it just reduces the loudness or the distress associated with tinnitus, that would be a huge improvement for a lot of people.
Absolutely. And I think that's what's important to focus on, finding what works best for you.
Exactly. There's no one-size-fits-all solution for tinnitus.
Right. Some people might find relief with sound therapy, while others might benefit from hearing aids, and others might find that this mute button method is the answer for them.
So it's really about trying different things and seeing what works best for your individual situation.
Exactly. And working with a healthcare professional who can help you figure out the best course of treatment.
Yeah, good advice. Well, I think that about covers it for our deep dive into the 5-second mute button method.
Yeah, I think we've pretty much explored all the angles.
So to sum it all up, This method is based on the idea that tinnitus is caused by an imbalance in brain chemistry, and that by rebalancing those chemicals, you can essentially mute the tinnitus.
Right.
And while the research is still limited, there's some evidence to suggest that this method could be effective.
It's definitely worth exploring further.
But it's important to manage expectations and to remember that there's no guarantee that it will work for everyone.
Right. It's not a miracle cure.
Exactly. So if you're struggling with tinnitus, I would encourage you to do your research, talk to your doctor, and see if this method might be right for you.
Yeah. And don't give up hope. There are things you can do to manage the condition and improve your quality of life.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the 5-second mute button method.
It's been a pleasure.
And if you're interested in learning more about this method, we've included some links in the show notes.
Yeah, check those out.
And until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep silencing that noise.